Good morning, good afternoon to everyone who has just joined. I think let us give it just a few moments before we kick off, just to allow our other attendees to join. I see we have 30 attendees so far. We will give it another 20 seconds and then we will kick off. Alrighty, let us get underway. So a very warm welcome to our L&D in Africa webinar. My name is Oliver Nathan. I am the Head of Learning at Africa People Advisory Group, and I am very pleased to see so many people attending our webinar today. So it's quite light on content, and we've only got an hour together, and really what I wanted to do for this hour that we have together is just give you an overview of some of my experiences as well as some trends in learning and development in the African continent and a little bit more broadly. Let us get underway. I think before we do though, if you do have any questions, please do just pop those questions into the chat or the Q&A, and if there is time at the end, we will take the opportunity to answer those questions to the best of our ability. However, if we do run out of time, please know that we are happy to interact and engage over LinkedIn. I will also leave my contact details if you'd like to get in touch with me so that we can have an interesting and creative discussion about learning and development in your organization. All righty, let us get underway. So, an overview, the agenda in terms of what I'd like for us to cover this morning or afternoon is really around looking a bit at corporate strategy and the intersection between learning and development strategy and corporate strategy, and really how these two fields of strategy are essentially at a crossroads, and the efforts that we need to put in to get our corporate strategy and learning and development strategies aligned so that we can execute on our corporate strategy more effectively. So good learning and development strategy really provides that opportunity to be able to effectively execute on our chosen strategic goals for the organization. From there, we'll pivot over into learning design and looking at learning design, what the current state of learning design is and what it will look like in the future. I see that one of our members says that I am breaking up. My voice is breaking up. I just wanted to confirm, can everybody hear me clearly? Just pop something in the chat or just send me a chat and just let me know if you can hear me clearly. All right, thank you. Thank you so much for the feedback. Lovely to see the feedback. Learning design now and into the future. Absolutely, as we mentioned, there are some really exciting developments with regards to how we design our learning and how we can make it as effective as possible in achieving its goals and bringing our learners in organizations along for the journey. This is an incredibly exciting aspect of learning and development that I think organizations, corporates, can really start to take seriously to make those learning interventions land so much better and so much more effectively with employees. We will then pivot over into the magic of understanding learning styles. I'll give an overview of the current state of play and then some new movements and some new interventions that we can build around people's different learning styles. And lastly, we will wrap up with a discussion on measuring learning impact and performance. Right, let us move on into our first topic. I do like to play videos, so I've got two short videos lined up for this webinar. The first video is really going to focus in on what some of the trends for learning and development are in 2022. Let me just hit play here. It's a great video.
Over 800 leadership, learning, and talent development professionals participated in the Ken Blanchard Company's 2022 HR L&D Trends Survey. Let's look at some highlights. Respondents indicated that people are overloaded, tired, and too busy to learn. Second, respondents identified that the level of connection in their organizations was dropping, leading to reduced trust and collaboration. The third theme discovered that L&D felt stretched, resulting in a general dissatisfaction with converted offerings. In fact, 53% believe their virtual and digital offerings are less effective than their face-to-face versions. When asked, what would make your virtual designs better? The top responses were more learner engagement and social interaction, more learning touchpoints over time, and better integration with respondents' workflows. To the question, what would you spend your time and money on if given more L&D resources? 47% of respondents indicated they would use additional resources to convert their workshops into learning journeys, while 39% would focus more on reinforcing learning and holding learners accountable. The upcoming year will bring new challenges and new requirements for building engaging, learner-centered experiences that help drive performance.
Right, so that video gives a nice overview of just what some of the trends are. And I think these are trends that are common to, well, certainly nearly all of the organizations that I've been working with over the last 2 or 3 years. That people feeling quite overloaded, tired, and too busy to learn, too busy to make those opportunities for discrete learning. Also, given hybrid working arrangements and sometimes the difficulties across the continent that individuals working in organizations might have with regards to connectivity, means that those levels and connections and opportunities for collaboration are really dropping. It is exciting and it is encouraging that we are getting the opportunity to get back to doing some face-to-face learning, but really, I believe that online learning, remote learning, whether it is online self-study or whether it is attending learning over Zoom or Teams, is really still here to stay. So really what we do need to think about are those opportunities to provide those types of engagements and social interactions, to promote social learning, in other words. And I think that's really, really important to pay attention to that kind of thing. We will talk about learning journeys a little bit later on, and building learning journeys, taking employees on a learning journey that allows them to experiment with what they are learning in the flow of work, but also at the same time, creating those opportunities for those employees to be able to take time for themselves to be able to learn will become all the more important. I also really love running polls, and we have 2 polls planned for today. And I think a good segue into our discussion around learning strategy and corporate strategy is to run the following poll. So I'd like to know from our audience, how important is it getting back to face-to-face learning for your organization? Maybe it's not at all important. Perhaps you're doing great with your online programs and you save yourselves a lot of money. Maybe it's somewhat important. Online learning is wonderfully scalable, but the collaboration might be lacking. Or it's important. Online connectivity is a real issue for our people. It's very important. Online learning is not as effective as face-to-face engagement. Or is it mission critical? Online learning really doesn't work well at all. Let's hear from you. I'm going to launch the poll and let's see what some of the feedback from our audience is. Right, you should see the poll pop up on your screen. Okay, we've got 11% participation, 28% participation. Give a few more moments for you to populate your response. Interesting. Interesting. I will give it 10 more seconds for you to pop in your response, and then I will end the poll. Okay, we have just about 80% participation in this poll. I'm going to end it here and broadcast the results to you. So you should see the results of the poll pop up on your screen now. So absolutely fascinating. So how important is getting back to face-to-face learning? Well, 40% of you said that it is somewhat important. So online learning is wonderfully scalable, but the opportunities for collaboration might be lacking with regards to that. I think, secondly, our second highest result was very important. So 27% of you said that it was very important that you get back to face-to-face learning, as online learning is not necessarily nearly as effective as face-to-face engagement. And I think my view and our approach is for us to provide a blend of these opportunities. And we will talk a little bit about learning styles and how certain learning styles lead themselves a little bit more effectively to certain platforms for learning. So you get some learning styles that benefit more from face-to-face type of engagements, and other learning styles that are for people that are more comfortable with that kind of learning that can take place online over Zoom or Teams, or that self-directed online self-study type learning. Fantastic. Thank you very much for participating in that. Right, moving on. The gentleman who you can see on your screen is a firm favorite of Africa People Advisory Group, and certainly one of my own. And this is because he can provide really, really clear definitions of what various different subspecializations are, or disciplines are, in the human resources space. Josh Burson and his academy really came up with a fantastic definition around what learning and development strategy could look like. So what is it? It's a strong, clearly articulated strategy with common goals, languages, and processes, which are crucial to keeping employees and teams in step with one another. Very, very important there. So what he's talking about here is the relationship between the organization strategy and the learning and development function, being able to help that organization and help the people in the organization to execute on the corporate strategy a little bit more effectively. The responsibility for making sure that the shared strategy is broadly understood and applied is increasingly falling to the learning and development and HR professional. A lovely little definition in terms of the promise that strategy can, or the promise that learning and development can hold in terms of executing on strategy. Now, I'm in favor of really trying to provide some simple definitions of what corporate strategy is, and we will go into a definition of what learning and development strategy is. And really, this is not necessarily exhaustive. This is my own view based on the research that I have done. So, of course, there are multiple views on what strategy is. But quite simply, the gentleman who you can see on your screen is a gentleman by the name of Michael Porter. So Michael Porter from Harvard Business School has been incredibly influential and impactful globally in terms of how organizations define and set good corporate strategy for themselves. His view, corporate strategy really concerns two different questions, right? So what businesses the corporation should be in, and also how the corporate office should manage that array of business units. To condense that down into its most simple point, there are two questions that a good strategy asks. The first one is, where will we play as an organization? In which markets are we choosing to operate? Secondly, how will we win in those markets where we have chosen to play? Those are the two key questions of strategy. Secondly, we ask ourselves, and I think you've already, I'm sure, picked up on this, putting together effective strategy is a questioning process and developing the right kinds of questions to guide us from a planning perspective and from an action perspective, right? So we answer question 1 and 2 to help us craft a strategy. Where will we play and how will we win? Then we would need to ask ourselves, do we have the competencies and resources in place to win where we play? And lastly, we want to ask ourselves, can we play and win before our competitors do? In other words, are we agile and responsive enough to win where we play, given our current set of competencies? Good learning and development strategy is quite tied in with Michael Porter's definition, right? McKinsey has developed a nice definition of what L&D strategy can be all about. So, a learning and development strategy seeks to set out some of the workforce capabilities, skills, and competencies that the organization needs and how they can be developed to ensure a sustainable, successful organization. So that's quite a generic definition. Linking it to corporate strategy is to ask the questions about our learning strategy. So do we have the people, competency, skills, talents, etc., to win where we've chosen to play? Very importantly, for us as learning practitioners in organizations, what are our skills and competency gaps, and how do we plan to fill those? And lastly, how will we know whether our learning interventions are effective in answering the how to win question? What we are trying to do here is to get good and strong alignment between the corporate strategy and the learning strategy. And I've created what I think is a nice diagram to help us explain this journey. And again, I've taken the questioning approach to developing strategy and putting together that alignment, right? So on your screen, you have a funnel. You see you've got corporate strategy and people strategy. And that for me is understanding if we are doing the right things. When it comes down to the level of learning and development strategy and the results, that is where we begin to measure and understand if we are doing things right, as opposed to doing the right things, right? So under corporate strategy, we've already mentioned it as well. And this is how you begin to start to get alignment between our corporate strategy, our people strategy, our learning and development strategy, and hopefully achieve the results that we'd like to see. Corporate strategy, again, where will we play? How will we win? In terms of the people strategy, will we build talent or buy talent or use a hybrid approach to win is important here. At a level down in the space of learning and development, what kind of interventions will we run to develop our people? And can we tie those back to our people strategy in terms of whether we're building or buying talent? And can we tie that back up another level up into the realm of corporate strategy? Can we tie our interventions into those where will we play and how will we win decisions? If we are able to tie the two together, then we can start to get alignment between our corporate strategy, our people strategy, and our L&D strategy. Lastly, in terms of results, we want to ask ourselves, what was the result of this alignment exercise? Did we win where we chose to play? And maybe what can we do better this time? There's something missing in this model, though. This can take a hang of a long time. And I think it is important for us to think about agility. So how will we align and realign at speed? What I'm going to propose to you is a solution that can help us to align and realign at speed, which we will get onto in a moment. Why then is strategy and learning and development at a crossroads? So again, this is from the Josh Bersin Academy, and it's just so beautifully positioned in terms of the changing role of learning and development. So in Josh Bersin's view, learning and development is transforming from being that order taker towards being a solution designer. And this really raises an interesting and important point about how the learning function is strategically integrated into the organization. So the transformation is really from learning and development as an order taker towards L&D as a solution designer, right? So we see a strategic realignment within the organization in terms of what your L&D practitioners ought to do. I'm just going to mention 2 points or 3 points on each of these buckets in terms of how learning and development roles are shifting and changing. I will share the slides with you, but suffice to say, and I'm sure this is something that is quite familiar to you. So under the current paradigm or the past paradigm, L&D as an order taker, it would often be line managers coming to you with a skills gap that they've identified to be filled. And the sentiment under learning and development as order taker is that your line managers will often come to you with the idea that, oh, we need you to run something training related to our people. And the training is the solution to every problem, and every challenge mindset is particularly prevalent under this paradigm. So as we move towards learning and development as a solution designer, we take the view that L&D is really not necessarily this one-stop shop for everything training related. We don't necessarily have all of these pre-built interventions that we are ready to deploy in a particular business unit or to a particular population. I believe it is really okay to challenge the assumptions that those line managers might have in your organization about the idea that it is just more training that is required and things will somehow magically come right. And I think on a deeper level, this is really about building those relationships with those line clients and with those audiences where the training needs to happen so that you can start to challenge them in healthy ways. It might be that learning is not necessarily the best approach for this. And if we challenge people in healthy ways, that can give us an opportunity to start to think a little bit more deeply with that internal client and create that opportunity for some co-creation around the content, but not just the content, the really the processes around learning that that are potentially going to work most effectively for this client. Right. Just checking our questions. Unfortunately, there was one question about whether this webinar can be delivered in French or with translation. That is an option that we are looking at. So for our next webinar, we do hope to have French transliteration at the bottom of your screen. Unfortunately, that was just not something that we were able to arrange in the time frame. Right, let us move on into our next bucket of content, which is really around learning design now and into the future. So when we talk about learning design, we talk about those opportunities for us to take a really deliberate approach to the content that we have. So either we have our own content as an organization, or we buy content, or we borrow content, or we have outside facilitators who facilitate or develop that content for us. Learning design is about putting that content together. And in terms of the slide on your screen now, I am sure that most of you are familiar with the ADDIE model for instructional design or for learning design, right? There are many models out there. I have given you a laundry list, which is by no means exhaustive in terms of the different learning models that are out there. There are many, many more. There are many, many more than this as well. To answer Tendai's question, am I going to share the slides? Absolutely, I will share the slides. Right, let's jump into ADDIE, because ADDIE is really one that we are quite familiar with. This is a model that is used globally to do effective learning design. And really what it looks at is it gives us a process. It actually gives us a project plan for designing learning interventions, right? Analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. And what you might know about the ADDIE model is under the analyze portion, we ask ourselves, what is the content and what is the business and learning need, right? The ADDIE model is really, really fundamental in learning and development. And we hear a lot of the language from this model enter our lexicon in terms of being a learning and development practitioner. Then under design, okay, so what does the plan look like? What are the specifications for the learning intervention? And how much do we need? So how much time, resources, people's energy do we need to make this particular intervention real? Then we go out and develop, taking the time to produce the content, the idea around let us collaborate, partner, and co-create a solution. And then in terms of implementation, then it's time to deploy our solution, and then we move on to evaluation. What was the reaction? What was the learning that happened? Did we observe any behavior shift? And what was the result of that particular learning intervention? So there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the ADDIE model. My view is that it's just not necessarily enough. There's so much more that we could be doing to design programs really, really much more effectively. Right? So what can ADDIE do? Again, ADDIE is really familiar to many learning practitioners. ADDIE gives us that process template or project planner for us to be able to work from. ADDIE gives us the ability to set those discrete milestones and goals, right, for the different components of a learning project, including putting together things like budgets, for example. So it's not all rainbows and unicorns. There are some challenges with the process. So ADDIE can be very heavily front-loaded, right? And when things are very heavily front-loaded in learning, it means that we put together all of the content up front and then just go out and deliver it. So the content development itself can be quite disconnected with the actual learner's experience. And thus the approach is arguably not necessarily very learner-centered. So that's one of the key criticisms of the ADDIE model. It's quite linear and it's quite front-heavy. It doesn't provide much opportunities for us to rapidly pivot away from maybe what is not working towards something that is a little bit more appropriate for the audience, right? So ADDIE can become very complex to manage, particularly with bigger learning interventions. ADDIE also lacks the flexibility and ability to respond to rapid changes in learning content. And that's the key thing for me. Rapid changes in learning content, rapid changes in terms of how that content might be delivered or received or communications. And it struggles with agility because we have to have very clear goals and well-researched learning objectives upfront with the ADDIE model. I'm proposing that we take a different approach to learning. So it doesn't mean that ADDIE falls away and it doesn't have its uses, but a more learner-centered design thinking-based approach to learning is what I am promulgating to be a much more effective approach to this. Right. Let me play another video for you in terms of design thinking for learning and development.
Well, I think one of the areas that design thinking can be most effective for a company is when you think about especially as it relates to human resources, is in the area of learning and development. Because learning and development is specifically geared towards, hey, we want to equip our employees to have certain competencies that will make them more successful in their job. And so learning and development generally has this shared idea of we want to equip and build capacity. And I think that's one of the greatest benefits of using design thinking in any company, whether it's HR or marketing or anything like that. It's the idea of not only solving complex problems, but it's also building a certain capacity or building a competency within a company to solve those problems moving forward.
That short video gives a good indication of what the approach that I'd like for us to take this morning, right? So it's not about transferring knowledge, but it's really about building people's capacity to be more effective at their job, to be able to execute on the company's chosen strategic objectives more effectively. Any good presentation has models in it, and this presentation that you are on this morning is no exception to that. Right, so let me pull up my model for learner-centered design. Really what learner-centered design is it is a process of building those learning experiences by focusing on learner challenges and building fitting solutions by working through an iterative process. That's a real mouthful, I understand. And I see there is a question around where does skills audit fit into the ADDIE model? And with your request, Sedinam, I'd like to respond to that question by asking ourselves, where does evaluation fit into the learner-centered design model? Rather, I think that's a more effective response. So if we start at context, the learning content that we are asked to deliver and the tasks that we are asking our employees to do in the learning process should really be relevant to the learner and their lives, right? So context matters. We need to be able to understand that context in which the learner is placed, whether that is the online context or the face-to-face context, or where they might be in terms of their career, or where the skills gaps potentially are. We would definitely need to be doing some kind of research to really understand that context most effectively. Our challenge then is to be able to relate that content to that context so that learners are able to more effectively connect in, right? Connect in with that content and make it more real for them. So learning about the job that you are doing is highly relevant and can help you to make the connections between new knowledge and new skills and the job that you're doing. So there is still very much a place for learning on the job to occur. And the fancy term for that is learning in the flow of work. And we'll talk about learning in the flow of work a little bit later on. If we move into the second step in the process, construction, right? So this is where we take the context and we take the content and we allow learners to be able to connect their own experiences with new content. So new information should be built on prior knowledge. A good idea is to ask learners to keep some sort of digital record of what has been covered and those opportunities to reflect on what they are learning. And the arguably most important point or step in this process is the conversation. So social learning, are we providing those opportunities for social learning to occur? Learners really should be able to discuss the subject matter with a trainer or a facilitator or with each other to create those opportunities for further collaboration and discussion and social learning. And then finally, collaboration. Do we provide those opportunities for learners to be able to collaborate with other learners, right? To be exposed to other learners' ideas, whether it's in the classroom, in the online classroom, in the workplace. Are we creating those opportunities? And really, this speaks to Josh Person's point around what is learning and development's task. It's not to be an order taker, but rather it is to be a solution designer or a co-creator. So really, what we ought to be doing is creating these opportunities for learning to happen, rather than being an internal vendor of learning into the organization. So it's just quite a simple model, which just gives an overview of learner-centered design. And the whole idea and why it is design-oriented is that it is an iterative process, right? So we move between construction and collaboration, and we iterate around that as many times as we need to, pivoting and changing content and the nature of those conversations so that we keep on providing those opportunities for learners to learn most effectively. Right, so I am not sure if you have heard about learning personas before. I am very, very interested in learning personas, and this is really where we get to the aggregation part, right? So often we think that in the new learning and development, to use Josh Person's content or idea again, that we might need to create these highly customized learning experiences for each individual in the organization. I don't know if that's even realistic. A better approach is for us to be able to develop learning personas. These are aggregations of different types of learners in your organization. And this allows us to start to build learning journeys that will speak to those particular segments of the learning population. So we can use our data. We might use skills gap analysis. We might use employee engagement data to be able to create different learning personas. Right? So learning personas are these well-developed fictional profiles that represent the target audience for whom we are designing learning interventions. These personas share common characteristics. So it's much broader than just demographics, right? Although demographics are an important aspect of this, training goals. Like, do we understand people's training and learning goals? Their professional responsibilities, their educational background, their skill level, maybe getting a sense of what people's home life might be, about what, how many kids do they have, you know, really getting a sense of who our people are and what of themselves they bring to work can help us design these learning personas. Right, so we can use these learning personas to help us to design effective learning journeys. And we will talk about that more when we go into our next slide. I've just provided you, yes, we will be sharing the slides with you, but I've just provided you an overview of what some sample learning personas could look like. And this idea is borrowed from the world of employee experience and the world of EVP, where we start to look at employee personas as a means to aggregate the different types of personalities, groups of personalities in our organization. So you have the rapid learner and the slow burner learner. And these two categories of learners or personas have very, very different needs from a learning perspective. It's really important for us to start to understand these needs so that we can make learning interventions more effective. I'd like to propose another model to you. One approach that is incredibly effective, I believe, to learner-centered design is the model that you see on the screen. I'll take you through the model very briefly. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go through it in much depth, but from an overview perspective, what is important to know is that the learner-centered design model is based directly in design thinking, right? That multiple iteration approach. Right, so first of all, we need to empathize. We need to think about those learner personas and how to personalize our lessons for every persona. from those who fly through material with ease to those who might struggle with concepts outside of their comfort zone. So we need to understand and empathize with those various different learning personas that we might have developed. We then need to define, right? So we will need to work with subject matter experts inside of the organization to define goals and learning objectives, potentially any additional needs for learning experiences that we are creating. Then the stage that we get quite caught up on if we're not careful is the ideation stage, right? So ideating is really brainstorming those new ways to bring content to life, using new types of questions, maybe simulations, games, learning apps, and very different assessment items. These are the sub-interventions that we might want to run in our overall learning intervention. Then we go out and prototype, right? So we deliver the first version of the learning experience. And this doesn't have to be perfect. We might want to pilot this out with a smaller group and see what the result is. We want to include things like visual design and content and opportunities for the group to give us feedback, and so that we can start to adapt the pathways. This is so important. Being able to rapidly prototype minimum viable learning product or service in your organization is going to create very, very rich opportunities for us to learn about what we are doing well and maybe what we are not doing well in learning and in the learning process. That is incredibly exciting for me. Then we go to user testing. So once we've collected that feedback, we test that intervention with our learners and see what the results are. Next step in the process is to go and refine. And this refine step can be quite difficult. We can get stuck here as well, right? It can be quite pesky. The number of stages involved in the learning design, and in fact, this stage can really occur endlessly after the previous 3 steps that we have mentioned. We need to know where to draw the line in terms of refining the model and going back to test it before we deliver a more finalized product. We will know, I think, when we are starting to get similar types of responses to our rapidly prototyped learning intervention. Then the idea is for us to deliver, right? To deliver on a more finalized learning product. And once we have finished the development, run a final quality assurance check and set our new course curriculum, perhaps, and get ready to enroll learners for that. Then, once we have delivered the course, let's take that opportunity to do some reflection, right? This is very, very different from the ADDIE model. The only similarity between this and the ADDIE model is that reflection happens at the end, right? But this multiple iterative process of ideation, prototyping, testing, and refining is really what sets this model apart. An incredibly exciting model. A few thoughts on it as we start to move on. Learner-centered approach to learning design allows us to build the learning aeroplane as we fly the aeroplane. This might be quite counterintuitive to some people. It's a concept that I'm certainly becoming much more familiar with. The power of this model, if learners feel they need to learn more of something new, we can rapidly pivot towards that, right? We haven't front-loaded too much content and process. Then, if new knowledge or tools might become available, which might benefit our learners, we can rapidly integrate these into one of our iterations and see what the result is then and there, rather than waiting for some evaluation right at the end of the program. And it provides us those opportunities to do that measurement. Those traditional measurements that we might want to do, that we are asked to do as corporates in terms of return on investment, performance levels, behavior shifts, etc., etc., etc. I wanted to make one comment on learning design and designing that learning in the flow of work. So some quite counterintuitive evidence has been presented to me when I was looking at a Qualtrics study around learning in the flow of work. 32% of employees in this particular study prefer formal learning or mentoring over on-the-job learning experiences. This is really quite surprising, given previous research suggesting that on-the-job experience is typically the most effective form of development. This is really, really interesting and a really counterintuitive finding by Qualtrics, which are an incredibly reputable research house. Are we seeing a shift back away from learning in the flow of work towards really providing those discrete opportunities where people can be relieved of stretch assignments just for maybe a few hours in a year to be able to go on a learning program outside of the workplace so that they can dedicate some time to their learning? It makes one wonder. I mean, I think this is very, very new research. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out and whether it becomes a trend that employees are wanting to create these really discrete learning opportunities outside of the formal workplace. Just another quote on this. I read this on LinkedIn the other day. Steve Hunt was saying that, you know, in terms of this quote from Qualtrics, from their research about the 32% of workers wanting discrete learning, he was saying, you know, this makes him wonder if employees are feeling burned out by those constant stretch assignments, and as a result would welcome having more dedicated time for them to just learn, to not sit and wonder how messed up and full their email inbox is going to get, and how many pings across Teams or Slack or whatever your internal messaging app might be that are waiting for them when they get back to the office. So just a reprieve from those feelings of burnout, I think, is an initial finding potentially of this research. What does Qualtrics ask us to do? They ask us to essentially get a blend, right? We want to do a nice blend of learning in the flow of work with those discrete opportunities for learning to take place in a more formal way, right? In a discrete learning intervention that is a little bit disconnected from the day-to-day jobs and work that people do. Qualtrics say we need a blend of both. They ask us to make that time and space for a learning culture to develop in the organization. They ask us to ask our employees to take ownership of their learning and to budget for that learning. And very importantly, and I think this is absolutely key, for us to be able to push progress in learning new skills and competencies and opportunities to demonstrate those skills and competencies, rather than showing perfection, or at least trying to show perfection, that we now have all of this knowledge in our head and we can go out and as employees and be able to deliver all of this value as a result of attending this training program. Development is very much a practice, and it's very important for us to be able to put that learning into context. So a nice blend, right, of learning in the flow of work and providing those discrete opportunities. We have about 10 minutes left in terms of this session. I'd like to move on to the section on the magic of learning styles, and I'd like to launch another poll. Do you know your own learning style? Are you a divergent, assimilating, converging, or accommodating type of learner? Or do you use a combination of learning styles in your own learning journey? Or maybe you have no idea which learning style best reflects you. Let me launch the poll. I'm interested to see what the results of this. I want to see what the different learning styles are in the room. Okay, I'm launching the poll now. You should be able to see it on your screen, and you should be able to complete. So, you're divergent, Maybe you're assimilating, converging, accommodation. Maybe you're a combination. Okay, we have about 35% of the audience that has completed. I'll give it another moment. Up to about 60%. I will give it another about 20 seconds. Right, last chance to put in poll responses. Up to 70%. And I am going to close this off now at 71% participation. All right, let me show you and share the results. As I anticipated, most of you use a combination of learning styles, and really honestly, we all use a combination of learning styles, but we definitely, and I know I definitely have biases towards a particular learning style. So I am very much a assimilating, bordering on converging type of learner myself. And we need to be able to understand this in terms of our personas and our employees in general, or what their learning styles are. Because learning styles are going to fundamentally impact, or at least should fundamentally impact, how we deliver learning interventions to our employees. If you are a learning practitioner, the gentleman on your screen should be very familiar to you. This is a gentleman by the name of David Cole. And he says, for us to start understanding learning styles, there's something that we have to do first, and that is understanding what learning as an experience is, right? So learning for Cole is the process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience, right? Knowledge is created. People learn by having different types of experiences. There are some learning styles which are better suited to certain learning experiences where learning can be optimized. And we need to do our learning designs accordingly to be able to speak to these multiple different learning styles that may be prevalent in our organizations. This is a model that I have developed, and it really helps us to understand, where learning can occur in the organization, right? So there are 4 key types of experiences for learning that any learner can have, right? There are concrete experiences. Those are experiences that learners have in the flow of work, in their jobs, maybe even at home, in their career. Then there are experiences around reflective observation, those opportunities to be able to reflect on what is being learned. Then we move on to the idea of abstract conceptualization, and that is the development, the learner developing concepts to be able to explain what it is that they are learning after their reflective observation. Then what typical learners do is move on to an opportunity to do some active experimentation with new content and knowledge that they have learned. And those active experience form the concrete experiences that learners have, right? So it's a really familiar, really well-known model. I have transposed 2 semicircles over this. One is around the learning in the flow of work, the Lifehow, and one is the learning in the flow of thought, the Lifeot. And for me, active experimentation and concrete experience really live in the realm of learning in the flow of work. And those opportunities for reflective observation and abstract conceptualization are really above the shoulders types of activity, where we sit and take the time to be able to think and learn as effectively as we can about what we are learning. Right? So the learning styles. Between concrete experience and reflective observation, you might have your diverging learners, you have your assimilating learners, your converging learners, and your accommodating learners. So diverging learners are really people who see things from these different perspectives. As we mentioned, they might prefer watching to doing and are able to use those imaginations to be creative in those overall learning styles. Assimilators, quite different. These are people who are able to really explore and analyze models well. I'm one of those assimilators. They are much more interested in concepts and tasks than potentially in people relationships. Their characteristics could include abstract conceptualization as well as that reflective observation. Converging, these people are good problem solvers, right? They're seen as being quite practical in their analysis of ideas and tasks, and they really benefit from active experimentation. They converge on the answers they want, and they're characterized by that abstract conceptualization and those opportunities to make concepts real through experimentation. And lastly, those accommodating learners. So these are people who tend to be a lot more practical in their outlook on learning, and they like to see problems from an intuitive point of view. They may rely a lot on gut feeling, but they do like these newfound challenges and may be characterized by by concrete experiences and that active experimentation. Understanding these learning styles really has a massive implication for the type of interventions we offer our employees and how to customize to need and to fit for purpose that they are. I want to show you an example of some interventions that can speak closely to the different learning styles that we've started to explore. On-the-job implementation might help your more accommodative and divergent learners. Formal learning interventions are important as well for your divergent and assimilating learners. Customized, individualized, and collaborative learning experiences might be better for your assimilating and converging learners. And lastly, mentoring and coaching can really, really help those who want to experiment a little bit more effectively, your converging and accommodating type learners. So I think it is to be able to be sensitive and understand what the different learning styles are, and to be able to map the right kinds of interventions to the key learning styles that might exist in an organization. We're never going to always get this right. Suffice to say, when we design a learning intervention, and I will wrap up here in a moment, when we design a learning intervention, we really, really want to at least have something for everyone. Right? We want to have something for everyone in the learning intervention. And that for us is why people development academies are incredibly important for Africa People Advisory Group. And I'm going to give you just an example of one. We run a human resources capability academy, and these provide these wonderful opportunities for people to stretch their legs and to stretch their learning styles, and to really get that opportunity to be able to cater for multiple different learning styles and learning experiences. Right, so we know quite a lot about capability academies. Ours is human resources based, but suffice to say, a combination of masterclasses, thought-provoking articles, insight studies, cases, then really practical workshops and mentorship circles, and aspects of e-learning, action learning projects, and process coaching means that there are opportunities for multiple different types of learners to learn in a way that is most effective for them. Right? It allows us the opportunity to rapidly pivot and rapidly prototype and meet those needs where they are. I'm going to wrap up here and just talk about measuring learning and impact as well as performance. So I'm not going to cover the slide. I will send you the slides so you can review them at your own leisure. But suffice to say, I think we are quite comfortable with regards to measuring the impact of learning in quite quantitative ways, right? So it might be through engagement surveys, might be through employee productivity, measuring that on time and quality after a learning intervention. It might be measuring performance against key responsibility areas, observing retention rates, and it might be those back-end usage statistics on our learner management system or our learner experience platform. So this is often something that we are quite familiar with in terms of measuring impact. It's not enough. This process that we have put together can provide opportunities for incredibly rich data to come out of the measurement process. The ideate, prototype, user test, and refine process can provide us with an enormous amount of qualitative data that can augment our quantitative data in terms of how effective learning can be. Another two, running focus groups post-learning intervention can really help us understand the collective experience of that learning and impact of that learning to make the right changes in the business and in the organization. And secondly, post-coaching interviews. We don't do nearly enough post-intervention interviews or even interviews along the learning journey in the flow of work to understand how employees are applying what they've learned back into the workplace. What I'm asking us to do is to really start to combine those quantitative and qualitative measures of learning impact into a cohesive argument for us to measure return on investment when it comes to learning. Folks, we have reached the end of our webinar. I know we are even 2 minutes over. If you have a look on your screen, feel free, please, to reach out to me. If you scan this QR code, I will pop the link in the chat. This will provide you an opportunity to give me an overview of what some of your learning and development challenges are, and then provide that opportunity for me to get in touch with you. And I'm more than happy to have a discussion around that. So complete the form. I'm going to pop it into the chat for you now. I would be more than happy to set up some time to have a discussion around how you can make your L&D function a bit more effective. And if you would like to bounce any ideas off me, I love meeting with people and I would be more than happy to do so. In terms of our Q&A, thank you very much for attending. I'm going to bring our webinar to a close, and I look forward to reaching out to you soon. So to everyone who attended the webinar, I will send you the slides. From there, you will have my email address. However, do use the form, reach out to me, more than happy to have a discussion with you. Thank you very, very much. I will send you the slides and the recordings, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar, which will be on HR metrics and analytics, and we will let you know when that launches. Thank you very, very much, folks, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you. Bye.